My white friend called me the N-word, did blackface at a wedding, and brought me into his company just to use me as a diversity token, so I exposed years of fraud, and now he works under me. I grew up as one of the only black people in Maine, so having all white friend groups was nothing new to me. Being called the N-word was standard practice, and my classmates would frequently whip me with towels pretending I was their slave. But as I got older, people got more educated, and it kind of just stopped. Until I met Trent during orientation week in college, and the first thing he asked me was, "Wow, is that jumper cotton? You must have picked it yourself." But I didn't laugh, just glared at him. So he took the hint and stopped, until a couple nights later, when we found ourselves at a frat party. We were standing beside a group of attractive girls when his jokes re-emerged. I always tell this one, pointing to me. It's amazing how his ancestors used to be out on the fields. Meanwhile, he's just partying his head off. I looked down at the ground. I didn't want to interrupt the laughter with confrontation, so I just let it slide. But once Trent figured out how to get girls' attention, he wasn't backing down. The entire night ended up as me just being the butt of every escalating joke. And by the time we were leaving, he was straight up referring to me as the N-word with the hard R. So when we were in the Uber back to my dorm, I fed him water and bread, all so he could sober up. As soon as the Uber drove away, I swung at him. His lanky self stumbled backwards, and he had a fake surprised look plastered on his face. I told him if he ever tried anything like that again, we'd never speak again. He apologized and blamed it on the alcohol, and I guess his bruised face made me feel bad because I ended up forgiving him. Even with what happened next, I still don't regret it because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. Anyway, a few months later, his cousin was getting married. He invited me, but under one condition. I couldn't wear my cultural attire because it might scare the groom's parents. An awful gut feeling washed over me, and I even felt myself cringe a little bit. But still, I agreed, because after all, it was their day, not mine. Me and Trent ended up wearing matching suits, and I was looking forward to it because it was my first wedding. The ceremony was beautiful, and it even made me feel a little lovesick. Then came the banquet. I couldn't find Trent anywhere, and he had been in the bathroom for almost an hour. I chuckled to myself, thinking that he probably just drank too much champagne and proceeded to eat without him. But then, 10 minutes later, he came stumbling in. I almost vomited. His face was covered in what looked like black eyeliner, and his lips were all puffy. "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catcha." He then proceeded to actually say the N-word, again with the hard R. I stormed out of the room. The last thing I heard was some drunk chuckling. Tears filled my eyes as I blocked him on everything, with no intention of speaking to him again. The rest of my college life was uphill after that. To my surprise, Trent was an exception. Turns out not everyone is a racist piece of crap, and I actually made some real friends, and I never heard from him again, until a year after graduating. Somehow, he had gotten a hold of my email. In it, he sent 3 photos of him doing volunteer work in Nigeria, my hometown. He then sent a very long paragraph about how much he had changed and how sorry he was. I didn't believe it, not for one bit. But I was impressed by his volunteer work, and his family had really great connections, so I agreed to meet him for dinner. His gait was confident. He smelled good, very put together. He apologized profusely and told me that his parents had raised him on that type of humor, but he has since cut ties and gone NC, and he is disgusted with his past behavior. As I looked into his eyes, I swear I saw a look of genuineness, so I accepted, and we caught up a few more times after that. It was on the 4th time that he asked for a favor. He asked if I could come into his company and help them with an issue in the accounting department. I was an accountant. He promised to pay me $1,000 for my time, so I instantly agreed. It was a no-brainer. His company was just outside of Maine in New Hampshire, so it wasn't too far either. When we arrived, a wave of culture shock hit my body. Literally everyone was white. The secretaries, doormen, lawyers, everyone. I tried to shrug it off, but it was hard as they all stared at me with unbreaking eye contact. I ended up being there for the week, and at the end, I sat in on a quarterly executive meeting. Nothing fancy, just some high-level discussion since I'd been helping. Midway through, one of the executives remarked that they had been relieved of the flag for zero visible diversity. Everyone patted me on the back. My blood went cold. That's why I was there? I thought back to all the jokes Trent made, all the times he used my race as social currency, all the times he called me darky, and at that moment, I just laughed. But behind my smile was something else, something more disturbing, because if he thought he could use me as his diversity token without consequences, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. After the meeting, Trent took me out for drinks to celebrate a successful week. I played along, smiling and nodding while my mind raced. He ordered expensive whiskey and proposed a toast to new beginnings and profitable partnerships. "So what did you think of the team?" he asked, swirling his drink. They seem nice, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. That comment about diversity was interesting, though. Trent waved his hand dismissively. Oh, that's just corporate talk. Don't worry about it. Was that why you brought me in? For diversity points? His smile faltered for just a second before returning. Of course not. Your accounting skills are top-notch. That was just a bonus. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept his explanation. But I knew the truth now. This wasn't about my skills, or even about friendship. This was about using me, just like he'd always done. Actually, Trent continued, leaning forward excitedly, the company is looking to hire a new financial controller. The pay is excellent, and with your skills, you'd be perfect. Plus, it would really help our diversity numbers. And there it was. The mask slipped just enough for me to see the real Trent underneath. He hadn't changed at all. I'll think about it, I said, forcing another smile. But what I was really thinking about was how to make Trent regret ever trying to use me again. I drove back to my apartment that night with my mind racing. The $1,000 check Trent had handed me felt dirty in my pocket. I couldn't stop thinking about that meeting. Zero visible diversity. Those words kept echoing in my head. I'd been nothing but a prop to them, a black mannequin they could wheel out when convenient. The weight of the realization settled uncomfortably on my shoulders as I navigated the familiar streets home, streetlights casting intermittent shadows across my dashboard. The next morning, I deposited the check and started researching Trent's company, New Hampshire Financial Advisors. Their website was all stock photos of diverse people smiling in business settings, but I knew the reality now. I dug deeper, checking their LinkedIn profiles, company reports, anything I could find. Their executive team photos told the real story, 27 white faces staring back at me. The contrast between their public image and the reality I'd witnessed firsthand was jarring, to say the least. I remembered the accounting issues I'd fixed for them. Nothing major, just some inefficiencies in their expense tracking system. But while I was in their system, I'd noticed something odd about their diversity initiative's budget. It was surprisingly large for a company with zero diversity. Where was that money going? The discrepancy nagged at me as I reviewed my notes from the project. I called my friend Marcus from college who worked in HR consulting. We grabbed coffee that weekend, and I explained the situation without naming names. The familiar coffee shop buzzed with weekend energy as we settled into a corner table, the aroma of freshly ground beans filling the air between us. Sounds like they might be claiming diversity initiatives for tax benefits without actually implementing anything, Marcus said, stirring his latte. It's more common than you'd think. Is that illegal? I asked, leaning forward slightly. Potentially fraudulent, especially if they're receiving government contracts or incentives based on those claims, he explained. But it's hard to prove without internal documents. I nodded, an idea forming in my mind. Trent had mentioned the financial controller position again in a text, asking if I'd thought about it. I hadn't responded yet. The opportunity seemed both problematic and potentially valuable, and I found myself weighing the ethical implications as I sipped my coffee. That night, I called Trent and told him I was interested in learning more about the position. He sounded ecstatic, talking about how we'd be working together and how much the company needed someone like me. I bit my tongue and agreed to come in for a formal interview the following week. After hanging up, I sat in the stillness of my apartment, wondering if I was making the right decision or playing with fire. The interview was exactly what I expected. The hiring panel asked basic questions about my experience, but their eyes kept drifting to my skin. The CEO, a man named Robert Whitley, barely glanced at my resume before telling me how refreshing my perspective would be. I smiled and nodded, playing the role they wanted. The conference room felt stuffy despite the air conditioning, and I maintained my professional demeanor despite my growing discomfort. We're very committed to diversity here, Robert said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. Trent has told us so much about your shared college experiences. My stomach turned at the thought of what Trent might have shared, but I kept my expression neutral. Yes, Trent and I go way back. After the interview, Trent took me to lunch, practically bouncing with excitement. They loved you. It's basically a done deal. We just need to go through the formalities. That's great, I said, picking at my salad. So tell me more about this diversity initiative budget I saw. Seems pretty substantial. Trent's smile flickered for just a second. Oh, that's just corporate stuff. Boring paperwork to keep the government happy. Right, but what does the money actually fund? I didn't see any diversity programs while I was there. He laughed nervously. Well, bringing you on would be the first step in our new direction. We're planning lots of initiatives. I nodded, filing away his non-answer. 2 days later, I got the job offer. The salary was impressive, significantly higher than my current position. I negotiated for a signing bonus and a written commitment to diversity initiatives in my contract. Trent was all too happy to agree. The contract arrived by courier the next day, and I spent the evening reviewing every clause carefully before signing. My first day as financial controller at New Hampshire Financial Advisors was surreal. My office was right next to Trent's, with a plaque on the door that read, Diversity Officer, under my actual title. I hadn't agreed to that. When I questioned it, Trent just shrugged and said it was an additional responsibility they thought I'd be perfect for. The office itself was spacious and well-appointed, with large windows overlooking the city skyline, a physical manifestation of the company's attempt to make me feel valued. I spent my first week learning the systems and meeting everyone. People were polite but distant, except for Susan in accounting. She was an older woman who had been with the company for 20 years and seemed genuinely kind. She helped me navigate the filing system and showed me where all the important documents were kept. Her efficient movements and encyclopedic knowledge of the company's processes spoke to her years of experience. The diversity budget has been growing every year, she mentioned casually one afternoon, but I've never seen where it goes. Robert handles that personally. I thanked her for the information and made a mental note to look into it further. That night, I stayed late after everyone had left. With my new access as financial controller, I could view all the company's accounts. I started digging through the diversity initiative expenses. The office was eerily quiet after hours, with only the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional ping of the elevator for company. What I found made my blood boil. The money was being funneled into a consulting company called Inclusive Futures LLC. I searched for information about this company and found it was registered to Robert Whitley's brother-in-law. They were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to this shell company for diversity consulting that clearly wasn't happening. The paper trail was surprisingly obvious once you knew what to look for. I took photos of the relevant documents with my phone and continued searching. In a folder labeled Government Contracts, I found applications for state and federal contracts that required diversity commitments. New Hampshire Financial Advisors had been claiming they met these requirements for years, using doctored photos and misleading statistics. Each falsified document represented not just a lie, but a deliberate attempt to game a system designed to create more equitable opportunities. One photo particularly caught my eye, a company picnic image that had been edited to include people of color who definitely didn't work there. Looking closer, I realized with horror that one of the faces photoshopped in was actually mine, taken from my LinkedIn profile. The manipulation was skilled but unmistakable to my eye. They had placed my face on someone else's body at what appeared to be a company event I had never attended. I was so focused on the documents that I didn't hear the door open. When I looked up, Trent was standing there, his expression unreadable. "Working late?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp. I quickly closed the files and smiled. "Just trying to get up to speed. Lot to learn." He nodded slowly. "Find anything interesting?" "Just familiarizing myself with the accounts," I said, standing up and grabbing my jacket. "I should head home. It's getting late." Trent walked me to my car, chatting about an upcoming client meeting, but I could feel his eyes on me, calculating. He knew I'd seen something. I needed to be more careful. The parking garage was nearly empty, our footsteps echoing between concrete pillars as we walked to my car. The next day, I noticed my computer had been accessed overnight. Nothing obvious was missing, but files had been moved. I started keeping my important findings on an encrypted USB drive that I took home with me every night. The invasion of privacy was concerning, but also confirmed my suspicions that I was onto something significant. Over the next few weeks, I built my case carefully. I documented every instance of fraud I could find, every misused diversity fund, every falsified report. I also started building relationships with other employees, particularly Susan and a guy named James from legal, who seemed uncomfortable with some of the company practices. These connections provided valuable context and additional insights into the company's operations. James and I grabbed lunch one day, and after some careful conversation, he confided in me. "This place wasn't always like this. When I started 5 years ago, Robert actually cared about building an ethical company. Then his brother-in-law Michael got involved, and everything changed." "Michael Mercer, from Inclusive Futures?" I asked, trying to keep my tone conversational despite my intense interest. James nodded. "He's got Robert convinced that they can make more money by just pretending to be diverse rather than actually doing the work. It's all about government contracts and tax breaks." This was valuable information. I asked James if he'd be willing to go on record about what he knew, but he hesitated. "I've got a family to support. I can't risk my job." I understood his position, but kept building my case anyway. Meanwhile, Trent was getting suspicious. He started showing up at my office unannounced, checking what I was working on. He invited me to his house for dinner one weekend, introducing me to his girlfriend Jennifer as our diversity hire, with a laugh that made my skin crawl. His suburban home was immaculately decorated, suggesting Jennifer's influence rather than his his own. Jennifer seemed embarrassed by his comment and later apologized when Trent was in the kitchen. "He doesn't mean anything by it," she said quietly. "He just doesn't think before he speaks sometimes." "Has he told you about our college days?" I asked, swirling the wine in my glass. She nodded uncomfortably. "He said you two were best friends." I almost choked on my drink. "Did he mention the blackface incident at his cousin's wedding?" Her eyes widened. "What? No, he never mentioned that." I told her the whole story, watching her face fall as she realized who she was dating. By the end of the night, she was looking at Trent differently, and he noticed. They had a whispered argument as I was leaving. I caught fragments of heated words as I retrieved my coat from the hallway closet. The next day, Trent cornered me in my office. "What did you say to Jennifer? She's barely speaking to me." "Just told her about our college memories," I said innocently. "The wedding was a highlight." His face darkened. "Look, I thought we were past all that." I apologized. "I'm giving you this opportunity. What more do you want?" "I want to do my job properly," I replied calmly, "including overseeing the diversity initiative's budget since apparently that's part of my role now." He stared at me blankly. "Fine, but remember who brought you in. You owe me." I didn't owe him anything, but I nodded anyway. That afternoon, I received an email giving me oversight of the diversity budget. It was exactly what I needed. The formal authorization gave me legitimate access to information I had previously been investigating covertly. With my new authority, I scheduled a meeting with Inclusive Futures LLC to discuss our diversity strategy. Trent insisted on attending with me, clearly nervous about what might happen. We drove to the meeting together, an uncomfortable silence filling the car despite Trent's occasional attempts at small talk. Michael Mercer was exactly what I expected, a smooth-talking consultant with expensive clothes and zero substance. His office was just a small room in a shared workspace with no actual employees in sight. When I asked for specific examples of the diversity work they'd done for our company, he fumbled through vague answers about cultural assessments and inclusion frameworks. His designer watch and tailored suit suggested he was profiting handsomely from this arrangement. I took detailed notes while Trent squirmed beside me. When I asked to see the diversity training materials they'd supposedly created for us, Michael promised to email them later. They never arrived. The meeting concluded with firm handshakes and hollow promises of follow-up that I knew would never materialize. Back at the office, I compiled a report documenting the fraudulent relationship with Inclusive Futures and the misuse of diversity funds. I also gathered evidence of the falsified government contract applications. The question was, what to do with this information? Each evening, I added to my documentation, organizing everything meticulously should it ever need to be presented to authorities. I considered going straight to the authorities, but I knew how these things often played out. The company would hire expensive lawyers, blame everything on a misunderstanding, and probably find a way to make me the scapegoat. I needed leverage. The right moment to act would require patience and strategic thinking. My opportunity came when Robert announced a major government contract bid that heavily emphasized diversity requirements. The company was going all in, with Trent leading the application process. They even scheduled a photo shoot for new marketing materials, asking me to stand front and center in every picture. The photographer directed me to various poses while my colleagues were arranged strategically around me. "We need to showcase our commitment to diversity," Robert explained during a planning meeting. "Our new diversity officer will be the face of this initiative." I smiled and agreed, playing along. After the meeting, Trent pulled me aside. "This contract is worth millions. If we land it, there's a big bonus in it for you." "Sounds great," I said. "I'm happy to help however I can." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. I helped prepare the bid documents, carefully noting every false claim they made. I posed for photos that would be used to misrepresent the company's diversity, and I finalized my own documentation of all their fraudulent activities. The deadline approached rapidly, with late nights becoming the norm as the team scrambled to complete the application. The night before the bid was due, I stayed late to review the final documents. Once everyone had left, I made my move. I replaced the diversity statistics with accurate ones, removed the false claims about diversity initiatives, and included a note explaining that previous applications had contained intentionally misleading information. I saved a copy of the original fraudulent bid as evidence. My heart raced as I made these changes, knowing there would be no turning back once the bid was submitted. The next morning, Trent was in a panic. "Someone changed the bid documents. All our diversity data is wrong." "What do you mean?" I asked innocently. "The numbers. They show we have almost no diversity, and someone removed all our initiative descriptions." He was practically shouting. "The bid is due in 2 hours." Robert called an emergency meeting. "Who had access to these documents?" he demanded, his face flushed with anger. All eyes turned to me. I shrugged. "I reviewed them last night, but I didn't change anything." anything. I just made sure the information was accurate. Accurate? Robert's face was turning red. The point was to win the contract. By lying? I asked, my voice level. That's fraud, Robert. It's illegal. The room went silent. Trent was staring at me with dawning horror. He knew I knew everything. The tension in the conference room was palpable, with several executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. We need to talk privately, Robert said finally, dismissing everyone else. Once we were alone, Robert tried a different approach. Look, I understand your concerns, but this is just how business works. Everyone exaggerates a little on these applications. This isn't exaggeration, I replied, pulling out my folder of evidence. This is systematic fraud. You've been misappropriating diversity funds, falsifying government applications, and using my image without permission to misrepresent your company. His face went pale as I laid out document after document. What do you want? He asked finally. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. I want real change, I said. Not just hiring me as your token black employee, but actual diversity initiatives. Hiring practices that bring in qualified people from all backgrounds. An end to the contract with inclusive futures and proper use of those funds. Robert laughed bitterly. And if I refuse? I stood up. Then these documents go to the State Attorney General, the IRS, and every government agency you've lied to over the past 5 years. He stared at me for a long moment, calculating his options. I need time to think about this. You have until tomorrow, I said, gathering my evidence and walking out. The conference room door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. Trent was waiting by my office, his face a mask of fury. What did you do? He hissed. The right thing, I replied, brushing past him. I gave you this job. I made you, he shouted after me. I turned back to face him. No, Trent, you used me, just like you always have, but not anymore. That night, I received a series of increasingly desperate texts from Trent, alternating between threats and pleas. I ignored them all and prepared for the next day's confrontation. Sleep eluded me as I rehearsed various scenarios in my mind, uncertain of what the morning would bring. When I arrived at work the next morning, security was waiting for me. Mr. Whitley would like to see you immediately, the guard said. I was escorted to the conference room where Robert, Trent, and 2 men in suits were waiting. My heart sank. They were going to fire me and probably try to discredit me before I could expose them. I gripped my briefcase tighter, ready to defend myself. This is Joseph Miller from the State Attorney General's office, Robert said, his voice tight. And this is Alex Williams from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I blinked in surprise. This wasn't what I expected. Mr. Whitley has contacted us regarding some concerning practices at this company, Joseph explained. He's volunteered to cooperate fully with our investigation. I looked at Robert, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Trent was slumped in his chair, looking defeated. We understand you have documentation of these practices, Alex said to me. We'd appreciate your cooperation as well. I nodded slowly, still processing what was happening. Of course, the next few hours were spent going through my evidence with the officials. Robert admitted to everything, explaining how the scheme had gradually evolved over the past 5 years from minor exaggerations to systematic fraud. He didn't try to minimize his role or shift blame entirely to Michael, which surprised me given his earlier resistance. Trent sat silently, occasionally shooting me venomous looks. The officials took detailed notes, occasionally exchanging glances as particularly damning evidence was presented. When the officials left with copies of all my documentation, Robert asked me to stay behind. Trent tried to stay too, but Robert dismissed him. The door closed behind Trent with more force than necessary, his frustration evident. Why did you contact the authorities yourself? I asked once we were alone. Robert sighed heavily. Because you were right. This has gone too far. And frankly, when I saw all the evidence you had, I knew we couldn't cover it up. Better to come clean on our terms than be exposed. What happens now? The company will pay significant fines. Michael will face criminal charges for his role in creating the fraudulent consulting scheme. We'll be under strict oversight for years. He looked at me directly. I'd like you to lead our actual diversity initiatives, real ones this time, with a real budget and real authority. I considered his offer. And Trent, that's up to you, Robert said. He was following my lead with the fraud, but his behavior toward you personally is unacceptable. If you want him gone, he's gone. I thought about it for a while, and something clicked. I don't want him fired. I want him to report to me. I want him to work on actual diversity initiatives under my supervision. Let him learn why this matters. Robert nodded slowly. That can be arranged. The next day, I called a company-wide meeting. Standing at the front of the room, I explained my new role and the changes that would be coming. Some people looked uncomfortable, others relieved. Susan gave me a subtle thumbs up from the back row. The large conference room was packed, with some employees standing along the walls to hear the announcement. This company has been operating under false pretenses, I said clearly. quietly. That ends today. We're going to build a truly inclusive workplace, not just pretend to have one for financial gain. Trent sat in the front row, his expression unreadable. When the meeting ended, he approached me hesitantly. "So you're my boss now," he said, his voice flat. "Yes," I replied simply. "You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? Getting hired, gathering evidence, all of it." I shook my head. "I just wanted a job, Trent. You're the one who made me your diversity token. Again, you never saw me as a person, just as a tool to use for your benefit." He had the decency to look ashamed. "So what now? You're going to make my life miserable until I quit." "No," I said. "I'm going to teach you to be better. You're going to learn why diversity actually matters, beyond checking boxes or making jokes. And maybe, just maybe, you'll finally understand why what you did was so wrong." Trent stood there with his mouth practically hanging open. Why give me another chance? After everything? I thought about it. Because everyone deserves a second chance, even you. But Trent, this is your last one. The following months weren't easy. Transforming a company culture takes time. Some employees resisted the changes, others embraced them. We implemented new hiring practices, created mentorship programs, and established partnerships with local colleges to create internship opportunities for underrepresented students. Each initiative required careful planning and consistent follow-through to ensure meaningful impact rather than superficial compliance. Trent struggled at first, clearly uncomfortable with his new role. But gradually, over the course of a year, I began to see subtle changes in him. The transformation wasn't dramatic or immediate. Real change rarely is. He stopped making jokes about race. He started listening more than talking. And when we hired our first batch of diverse interns, I caught him genuinely helping a young Nigerian student navigate the office culture. One evening, as we were leaving work, Trent stopped me in the parking lot. "I need to say something," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Go ahead," I replied, curious. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Not just for the company stuff, but for everything. College, the wedding, all of it. I was racist, and I used you, and I'm sorry." I studied his face, looking for the insincerity I'd always seen before. But this time, I saw something different. Not complete transformation, but the beginning of genuine remorse. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "Jennifer left me," he added, "after what you told her. She was right to." I nodded, not sure what to say. "Anyway," he continued awkwardly, "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand now. What I did was wrong, and I'm trying to be better." As I drove home that night, I thought about how far we'd come. The company was changing, though not as rapidly as I might have hoped. Trent was changing too, though the journey was clearly difficult for him. And I had found my voice, refusing to be anyone's token ever again. The city lights blurred slightly as I navigated the familiar route home, reflecting on the unexpected journey of the past few months. The investigation into the company's practices continued, with Michael eventually facing fraud charges. Robert stepped down as CEO, replaced by a woman named Sarah, who was committed to continuing our diversity work. And I received a promotion to Director of Finance and Inclusion, with a seat on the executive board. My new office on the executive floor symbolized not just personal achievement, but a structural change in how the company operated. It wasn't perfect. Change never is. But as I looked around the conference room during my first board meeting, seeing new faces from different backgrounds sharing their perspectives, I knew we were moving in the right direction. And Trent, sitting at the far end of the table taking notes, was finally learning what real inclusion looked like. The conversations were richer, the decisions more nuanced, and the company culture noticeably healthier. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone. Sometimes it's about forcing them to grow, to see the world through different eyes, and to finally understand the damage they've caused. Trent would never be my friend again, but watching him become a better person was satisfaction enough. The company transformation was moving along steadily. Within 6 months, we'd hired 15 new employees from diverse backgrounds. The board meetings actually had different voices and perspectives now. It wasn't just for show either. Our decision-making improved, and we were landing better contracts because of our genuine diversity initiatives. Sarah was proving to be an excellent CEO, bringing a fresh approach that valued substance over appearances. Trent was still Trent, but different. He'd stopped making racist jokes completely, which was a start. I caught him reading books about racial justice on his lunch break once. He tried to hide it when he saw me, which was kind of funny. The guy who once did blackface at a wedding was now secretly educating himself. Progress, I guess. One Tuesday morning, I was reviewing some financial reports when Susan knocked on my door. She looked concerned. "You need to see this," she said, handing me a folder. I found it while organizing the old archives. Inside was a series of emails between Robert, Michael, and Trent from before I was hired. They were explicitly discussing bringing me on as a diversity prop to help secure government contracts. Trent had suggested me specifically because he knew I was desperate enough to take any job and wouldn't make waves. The language they used to describe me made my stomach turn. "Where did you find these?" I asked Susan. "Robert didn't clear out all his files when he left," she explained. "These were in a hidden folder on the server. I was doing some cleanup and stumbled across them." I thanked her and spent the next hour reading through everything. The emails dated back months before Trent had reached out to me. This wasn't a spontaneous idea. They had planned to use me from the beginning. Trent had even boasted about how easy it would be to manipulate me because of our history. I printed the emails and locked them in my desk drawer. I wasn't sure what to do with them yet, but they were important evidence of just how calculated their scheme had been. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest as I tried to focus on my actual work for the rest of the day. That evening, Trent stopped by my office as I was packing up to leave. "Hey, a bunch of us are going for drinks at Riley's. Want to join?" he asked, leaning against my doorframe. I considered declining, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sure, I'll stop by for one." Riley's was a bar near the office that a lot of employees frequented. It was busy when I arrived, but I spotted our group in the corner. Trent waved me over, and I noticed he'd saved me a seat. The gesture would have seemed friendly if I hadn't just read those emails. The conversation flowed easily enough. People were discussing weekend plans and complaining about clients. I nursed my beer and observed Trent interacting with everyone. He seemed different in this setting, more relaxed, less performative. Maybe he really was changing. After about an hour, people started heading home. Eventually, it was just Trent and me at the table. An awkward silence settled between us. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally, staring into his glass. "Go ahead. Do you think people can really change? Like, fundamentally?" I considered the question. "I think people can change their behaviors. Whether that counts as fundamental change depends on why they're doing it." "What do you mean? Are you changing because you genuinely understand why your previous behavior was wrong? Or are you just adapting because the consequences caught up with you?" He flinched slightly. "That's fair. I guess I'm still figuring that out." I decided to push a little. "Why did you really invite me to work at the company, Trent?" His eyes darted away from mine. "I told you. We needed accounting help. No more lies, okay? I know the truth." His face paled slightly. "What do you mean?" "I didn't mention the emails directly. I wanted to see if he'd come clean on his own. I've been at the company long enough to piece things together. You didn't bring me in for my accounting skills." The room was silent for a minute. Then he sighed heavily. "It wasn't my idea initially. Robert and Michael were looking for a way to check the diversity box without actually changing anything. I suggested you because, well, we had history. I thought you'd be grateful for the opportunity." "Grateful," I repeated flatly. "I know how it sounds," he said quickly, "but I swear, I thought I was helping you too. Good job, good pay, win-win. Except I was just a token to you." Again, he didn't deny it. "At first, yeah, but things are different now." "Are they? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" Trent looked genuinely hurt. "I'm trying, man. I really am. The stuff I did in college, the wedding, I was a complete a-hole. I see that now. Working under you these past months has been eye-opening." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But those emails were hard to reconcile with this seemingly contrite version of Trent sitting across from me. "I need to head home," I said, standing up. "Early meeting tomorrow." He nodded, looking disappointed. "Yeah, sure. See you tomorrow." I walked to my car feeling conflicted. The Trent in those emails was calculating and manipulative. The Trent at the bar seemed sincere in his desire to change. I wasn't sure which version to believe. The next morning, I had a meeting with Joseph Miller from the Attorney General's office. The investigation into the company's fraudulent practices was wrapping up, and he wanted my final statement. We met at a coffee shop downtown to keep things low-key. "The company will face significant fines," Joseph explained. "But with the cooperation and the changes you've implemented, there won't be criminal charges against the current leadership." "What about Trent?" I asked. "What's his status in all this?" Joseph consulted his notes. "Based on the evidence, he was following orders rather than initiating the fraud. His cooperation has been noted positively in our report." I nodded, thinking about those emails sitting in my desk drawer. If I turned them over now, it would change things for Trent. The investigation would show he was more involved than previously thought. "Is there something else?" Joseph asked, noticing my hesitation. "No," I said finally. "I think you have everything you need." I wasn't protecting Trent out of loyalty. I just wasn't convinced that punishing him further would accomplish anything meaningful. The company was changing. He was changing. Sometimes justice looks different than we expect. Back at the office, I found Trent waiting by my door. He looked nervous. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Privately?" I let him in and closed the door behind us. He paced for a moment before speaking. "I couldn't sleep last night," he began. "After our conversation, I realized I've never been fully honest with you about anything." I sat down at my desk, waiting. "When Robert first first suggested bringing you in as a diversity hire, I didn't just go along with it. I encouraged it. I saw it as an opportunity to, I don't know, have power over you somehow. After you punched me in college, there was always this part of me that wanted to get back at you. I wasn't surprised, but hearing him admit it still stung. But working with you these past months, he continued, seeing how you've transformed this company, how you've handled everything with such integrity, I'm ashamed of who I was, who I've been. He pulled out an envelope and placed it on my desk. This is my resignation. I don't deserve to work here after what I did. I stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Is this another performance, Trent? Another way to manipulate the situation? He shook his head. No performances. No more manipulation. I just can't keep pretending I deserve this second chance you gave me. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the folder of emails. Susan found these yesterday. Trent's face fell as he realized what they were. So you already knew? Yes. Then why didn't you say anything last night? Why didn't you turn me into the investigators this morning? I considered the question carefully. Because firing you or seeing you prosecuted wouldn't actually solve anything. You'd just be another white guy who got caught being racist, paid some price, and moved on without really changing. So, what do you want from me? I want you to stay and do the work, I said, pushing the resignation letter back toward him. Not because you feel guilty or because you're afraid of consequences, but because it's the right thing to do. He looked confused. After everything I did, you still want me here? I want you to understand why diversity matters. Really understand it, not just as a checkbox or a way to avoid getting in trouble. And the only way that happens is if you stay and keep learning. Trent sat down heavily in the chair across from me. I don't deserve this. It's not about what you deserve, I replied. It's about what's actually going to create change. The next few weeks were awkward, but productive. Trent threw himself into our diversity initiatives with unexpected enthusiasm. He organized a series of listening sessions where employees from underrepresented groups could share their experiences. He even reached out to local colleges about establishing scholarships for minority students interested in finance. I kept a close eye on him, of course. Trust is earned, not given, but I had to admit, his efforts seemed genuine. The calculating manipulator from those emails was slowly being replaced by someone who seemed to genuinely care about making things right. One afternoon, Sarah called me into her office. The board is impressed with the changes we've made, she said. They want to expand our diversity initiatives to our other offices. That's great news, I replied. They also want to create a new position, Chief Diversity Officer, and they want you to fill it. I was surprised. What about my finance role? We'd hire someone new for that. This would be a promotion, with a seat on the executive committee. You'd have authority over all our inclusion efforts company-wide. It was a significant opportunity, but I hesitated. Can I think about it? Sarah nodded. Of course, take the weekend. As I walked back to my office, I ran into Trent in the hallway. He noticed my expression. Everything okay? Sarah just offered me a promotion, Chief Diversity Officer for the whole company. That's amazing, he said, genuinely excited for me. You absolutely deserve it. I'm not sure if I want it, I admitted. It would mean giving up the finance work. Trent considered this. Can I offer some perspective? Before you came, this place was just going through the motions. Now we're actually making real changes. That's because of you. Imagine what you could do company-wide. His enthusiasm was unexpected, but not unwelcome. I'll think about it. That weekend, I weighed my options carefully. The finance role was what I had trained for, what I knew. The diversity position would be challenging in different ways, but maybe that was the point. Change doesn't happen in comfortable spaces. I accepted the promotion on Monday morning. Sarah was thrilled, and the announcement went out to the whole company that afternoon. The congratulations poured in, including a surprisingly heartfelt email from Trent. My first task as Chief Diversity Officer was to assess all our offices nationwide. I spent the next month traveling, meeting employees, and evaluating existing practices. The patterns were consistent, surface-level diversity efforts with little substance behind them. It was going to be a big job to transform the entire company culture. When I returned from my assessment tour, I found a surprise waiting in my new office. The team had organized a small celebration, complete with cake and decorations. Susan, James, and several others were there, along with Trent, who hung back awkwardly. This was Trent's idea, Susan whispered to me. He organized everything. After the cake was cut and people started mingling, Trent approached me. Congratulations again. The company is lucky to have you in this role. Thanks for putting this together, I said. It means a lot. He nodded, then hesitated before continuing. I've been thinking about our conversation, about whether people can really change. I don't know if I have yet, but I'm trying. And I wanted you to know that I'm grateful you didn't give up on me, even when you had every reason to. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Keep doing the work, Trent. That's all any of us can do. 6 months into my new role, the changes were becoming visible across the company. Our hiring demographics had shifted significantly. Employee resource groups were thriving. We'd implemented implemented mentorship programs that were creating pathways for advancement for people from all backgrounds. Trent had stepped up in unexpected ways, becoming one of our most effective advocates for change. He still had moments of clumsiness, still occasionally said the wrong thing, but his commitment was undeniable. The calculating manipulator I'd met in college had evolved into someone who genuinely cared about making things right. 1 year to the day after I'd discovered those damning emails, I finally shredded them, not to protect Trent, but because they no longer defined who he was or what our working relationship had become. People aren't static. They grow, they learn, they change, if given the chance and the right motivation. The company that had once used me as a diversity token was now leading our industry in genuine inclusion efforts. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. Real change never is, but it was substantial and ongoing. As for Trent and me, we never became friends exactly. Too much history stood between us for that. But we developed a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect and a shared commitment to doing better. Sometimes that's enough. I still think about that moment in the executive meeting when I realized I was just a token to them. How my blood went cold. How I laughed along while plotting my next move. It would have been easier to just walk away, to find another job where I might be valued for my skills rather than my skin color. But by staying, by fighting for real change, I transformed not just my own situation, but an entire company culture. And in the process, I helped someone who once saw me as nothing more than a prop understand the true meaning of diversity and inclusion. That's not a bad outcome for someone who was only brought in to check a box.